Okay, compressed gases, burnable gases, non-burnable gases, all kinds of stuff. We're going to work our way around to doing welding, brazing, cutting. We're going to kind of look at this slowly. And part of that is, I saw somebody the other day, and I've seen, there's lots of things out there on the tube about different appliances, bottles. And I saw one guy said that he was going to do on everything. And he spent 17 minutes telling you about how to sort of use a cutting torch, but not correctly. So, fortunately for us going to do this now, somebody hasn't really gone out and covered everything, and we're going to miss stuff too. Okay, bottles. Basic bottles, real small. This one's propane, but in your and this one here is propane also. But in your bottles, they're not all the same concept of what we're storing. There are different pressures, and like this one here, if you rattle it, you can tell it's liquid in there. If it is taking gas off of it, you'll notice a cool line on here where it'll make frost if you've been using it for a long time. The liquid will be on one point and the gas will be where the frost line is. So you'll see frost on, that'll tell you how much liquid's in there without having to shake it or anything on one that's got liquid in it. Your liquids that you find are propane, butane as a gas. You're going to have liquid, excuse me. Propane is a liquid. Butane is a liquid, the way we normally ship it. Natural gas you won't have as a liquid. Natural gas takes too much pressure to hold it into a liquid. You can make any of them liquids, but it takes too much pressure at room temperature. And that's why normally we don't have natural gas as a liquid. They do on some applications now for vehicles, but an awful lot of them are still just cooled vessels that slowly boils off, and you lose it if you wait too long. You can't leave it stored for a long time. And then, of course, your natural gas pipeline is a low-pressure pipeline that comes to your house, unless it's a transportation line, and then it's either a higher pressure or it is liquefied and just insulated and kept cold as they pump it through the lines, and then evaporated when we're on the other side. Like in Fairbanks here, we currently, while I talk about getting natural gas from the North Slope or even out of Kenai area, I forget exactly where it is, but somewhere around Kenai, instead of getting natural gas through a line at this time, they truck it. And they truck it here in insulated trucks that are essentially just a little bit over atmospheric pressure, and they're hauling it in liquid. Then they store it in big liquid tanks, and they keep enough drawing off so that it stays liquid, because as you draw it off, the expansion cools the rest of the pool of liquid down. The gas expanding takes the heat, puts it over to a larger area, and then that heat goes away. And that's how refrigeration works too. But we're not on refrigeration today, we're on other things, even though refrigeration is also part of this though. That is how they industrially make oxygen. The oxygen that they make is what they'll do. A couple different ways. So the smaller plants, you might use a cryo cooler, which is a Stirling engine running in reverse. We've actually got one of those here that will liquefy air, and the way it's originally set up was to pre-separate it out so the oxygen was away and you were getting mostly nitrogen. It was for making liquid nitrogen. Originally it was for supercomputers that were here in Alaska. When they came up with the next round of supercomputers that didn't need the supercooling, they had just rebuilt the machine, and then they decided to throw it away and actually pay people to take it out and throw it away, which was really cool because the guy that was paid to take it out was a friend of mine. He tried for a while to sell it for real money, and one day he was just like, "You want that thing, John? Nobody's giving me real money for it." So we made a quick agreement for not too much money, and I brought it home. So, but the more common way is just strictly compressing it. They just compress it, and even though you might compress air to, let's say we compress air to 2,000 psi, which they can do way over that. Our air bottles for scuba tanks and stuff. The newer ones are over 4,000 psi. But even if it was just 2,000 psi that you compress it to, then you let a bunch of it escape back into the air. When it escapes back into the air, it cools down what air is left, and you start having liquid forming. And the more that you do this and release the high pressure, the more liquid you get. So that's a real simple one. And then the way they pick out the different gases that are in the air is by letting it boil off at different temperatures. They cool it all down, it's all cold, and then slowly warm it up, and different things come off at different temperatures. Obviously, the lower pressure things are going to come off first, and then the higher pressure things. So that's how they come up with stuff. That's how they come up with the helium. Now, helium is a gas that's normally coming out of the gases that are in oil wells, is where the helium comes from. We don't find it out here in the air. It's light enough so that it generally just goes away. It is one of those non-renewable things as far as we believe at this point. A lot of stuff we have is not non, but the helium is not. It goes away. In fact, if you have extremely sensitive devices, they can pick up a few atoms of helium coming through the steel bottles. It's very slow, not enough to worry about over decades of, you're not going to lose pressure, but it can be detected coming through the steel. Helium goes through stuff. It's light. It's actually one of the things they use a lot of times. Helium is for, we're going to have a lot of variety of information here, but that's what I'm shooting for. I've got the stuff around to try and remind me different things. They use helium for leak detection because you can put in helium at a very low pressure. There's good sensors they've got that will pick it up. It's not harmful. They used to use some of the refrigerants, a similar idea, use Freon 12, but yeah, Freon 12, we're not supposed to be turning that loose in the environment these days, and helium works good. You could probably, hydrogen is going to be, but hydrogen is reactive. See, if hydrogen was trying to go through that piece of steel, it will react with the steel. If it's actually, hydrogen's small, but it will react with the surface of the steel, and then it doesn't go anywhere. Anyway, the helium is inert. So, again, our bottles. Now, we have a third one, which is, as far as our types of gas storage, that's a little bit different, and that's acetylene. Acetylene is cool, acetylene expensive, acetylene is different. And just, this is acetylene, that's an acetylene bottle of another older type. This one's acetylene. This one next to it is a pressure bottle. I think it's nitrogen, but I don't remember for sure what was in it. An oxygen, another little acetylene here. And of course, not all the bottles have caps on them, but most of them do in an industrial for safety, so that you're not knocking a valve off and having either a dangerous gas or pressure exposure. Littler ones, they don't, but you know, the amount of acetylene that's in this would still destroy a bus, blow it apart. That's still a lot of acetylene as far as its possible exposure. But they don't put protectors on the little ones, so it's just the way it is. Acetylene, go back in the older books, the old days, you know, like back when I was a kid. No, before that even. When I was a kid, we used acetylene bottles yet. My dad had them on the farm. The acetylene in the early days is made with calcium carbide, was what they would do. They just ship you calcium carbide. They did not ship you acetylene. You would buy I could say one because they make those today, but basically in the old days, nobody had 1 pound cans. It's like, why? You know, you had 5 pound, 10 pound, 25 pound, and 100 pound cans. You know, people used a lot of calcium carbide. That was the acetylene that ran your old headlights on your cars back in 1895, 1910. You see those lights on there. People, oh, look, it's got propane. No, it doesn't have propane lights. It has acetylene lights. They ran on acetylene on the car itself. They had a little generator that generated the acetylene. Sometimes you'd have a light like a miner's light, an old style of miner's light, where it dropped the calcium carbide into water in the light itself. And you can still buy those. They're kind of cute, and some people use them. It's not a whole lot of acetylene generated at one time, and it burns, and it's a relatively safe thing. But they had a lot of problems with the generators exploding on people, and a lot of the problem came with higher delivery pressures coming off of the generators. And there were laws to make it under 30 pounds and then to make it under 15 pounds, and these laws didn't really fix all of the problems. And obviously when they make acetylene, they're doing the same thing. They're dropping calcium carbide in water. They're doing it on a larger scale. But what we have today, because the acetylene, and there's a lot of discussion, I couldn't really find everything for real the last time I looked, as far as at what pressure it will bond with itself and become reactive within itself. Acetylene will actually react with itself to destruct and explode a bottle. But that's at a higher pressure. One of the things you don't want to do is you don't want to get the side of your acetylene bottles really hot. It's very seldom, but like if an arc welding strike gets here, a lot of times the arc welding strike would come here. It's just a weak spot in the bottle that makes it where somebody won't want to refill it later, and that's the end of the story. Other times, that arc spot will be hot enough to start the reaction inside. The reaction will start disassociating the acetylene, and it'll start getting hot. And if it is getting hotter throughout the day, move it away from everybody. I don't know how hot it needs to go to blow up, but there's a point at which it will just blow up. It doesn't need other oxygen or anything else to make it happy to blow up. It just blows up. And that was some of what would happen with the acetylene generators. They were hot. They were hot, higher pressures. I've actually got half of one here yet. I think I've got the control head. I used to have a whole one, but I gave it to one of my friends in the Antique Engine Club, and he's downsized his stuff. Who knows? I might end up with it back. It's not functional. I say it's not functional. It's not safely functional. Obviously, somebody was using it. They had done many repairs on it. I consider it not functional. It looked pretty scary. The vessel was mostly intact. It only had a few welded repairs on it. But the control valve was pretty, and it was going to need new rubber seals. So, but I wasn't. Another friend of mine actually has one that is new, unused, antique, and I forget whether he wanted $2,000 or $3,000 for it, or maybe it was $1,500. It was more than I wanted to spend for it, just for curiosity and neatness. But you know, if it would have been $500, I'd have probably wanted to look at it. But I don't need it. I don't need it. You still got to get the calcium carbide if you're going to do that too. And calcium carbide is quite expensive these days when you're buying it because of the additional packaging and shipping. It's not like in the old days where it was at the hardware store all the time, easily. So anyway, they make the acetylene gas. And then the acetylene gas is dissolved into acetone. There may be a combination, but acetone is the main solvent that they use for dissolving the acetylene into, much just like soda pop. How your soda pop has CO2 in it, they will take and dissolve it. And then inside of here is a whole bunch of packing, and over the years they've used different types of packing. I know what it looks like. I'm not sure I would use the right name, so I won't say, but it's a packing that will absorb the acetone. It's so that the liquid acetone gets absorbed in here. You don't have puddles of it up on top of the bottle. The top of the bottle here has a space in it. This space is so that you can have your full pressure gas acetylene that is coming out of the bottle. If the bottle is cold, it won't put out as much acetylene. If the bottle is smaller, a smaller bottle does not flow as much acetylene. If you are flowing more out of the bottle than what it will do an acetylene, it will start flowing some acetone along with the gas. It will pull liquid acetone will come out. You will see extra little sparklers. Your gas, your acetylene, you'll do this sometimes if the bottle's near empty too, without a high flow. It's best to leave a little bit of pressure in the acetylene. They really would like you at the bottling companies, whether it's best for your money or not, they'd really like you to leave a little pressure in all the bottles. And it's not just a matter of they want to get some gas back. You know, you don't have much use for 5 psi in an oxygen bottle. It's not going to do you any good. So it really doesn't gain you to open it and drain it down to 0 to say, I want them to give me all the... What it does is it's a better assurance that the inside of the bottle is clean until the next time that they're going through and cycling it, pressure testing it, looking for condition, pulling the valve out, doing all of these inspections with it. It's better for them to have a little bit of pressure in there, so they will open the bottle up, close it down, see that something's flowing out, doesn't smell like gasoline. I've heard that from one of the bottling plants. Somebody had used an oxygen bottle for storing gasoline in. Bad idea, very bad. And fortunately, there is somebody at these bottling plants looking for that stuff. Which also brings me to another little side thing here, is the valves. The valves on the bottles, but there are generally, for your fuel gas anyway, there's a left-hand and a right-hand thread. When it's fuel gas, it's a left-hand thread. You want to take this off, you turn it clockwise in towards the valve because it's a left-hand thread. And that's the same fitting on this, that's on this propane right now that we're on this oxyacetylene set, as it would be for the acetylene. They're the same valve. The oxygen is a external threaded, and it is a right-hand thread. Now, I don't remember what it was, but many years ago, Airco had one of these two, either they had their own idea of valves because they didn't want to be having people bring valves in from other. Well, after a little while, they decided that they would let people bring bottles in and fill them for other people. So they just had adapters. But I forget whether their oxygen was the same as acetylene or whether their acetylene was the same as oxygen. Something was the same as what other people were doing, but it wasn't really the same. They had an explosion in Vancouver, Washington, nearby where I grew up. And I don't know if that was because of the valves, and I don't know if they've changed the valves today or not. And I never actually threaded the two together, so while I say they may have just looked like they were the same. They may have been very similar, but somehow at this plant, they had one of the bottles. It was an acetylene bottle that got connected to the oxygen filling line. And they, not the guy that did this, because he was gone, but the people a couple years later that had taken over, and they were showing us in safety in a welding class, they were showing us the particular bottle that had been an acetylene bottle. In fact, it was this size here. It was the number 4. And they had that bottle, had one like that, and they had hooked oxygen into it and turned it on. And that was the end of the bottling plant. Because pure oxygen and acetylene, you really don't have to do anything more. It's taking off on its own, and the acetylene bottle is probably going to burst at about 700 pounds, and then it's all going to go out in the rest of the plant, and it's just ugly. So, but what was really interesting to it is he showed us the bottle, okay? So he shows us this bottle, and you look at the bottle, and you're like, the threads are kind of messed up, and there's just a little piece of bronze in the middle of it. So you're saying the valve there's just a little bit of the valve left in there. Then he gives you a little information, which I was the one holding it when he told the group the information. Now look at the other side of it. So you turn it over, and the part that you thought was the bottom that had blown out, you turn it over and you look in there, and the whole valve is inside there. It actually had turned the whole bottle inside out. The valve, the part that I was looking at, was from here, and this whole bottle was missing the bottom, but had turned inside out. It had gotten hot enough, quick enough, enough pressure, it just rolled it all inside out. It's a pretty neat little display piece. But you could look down in there and see from inside here, you could see the valve. And pretty impressive as far as the power of making a boo-boo on that stuff. So, talking about that, we also have, straight, standard, I put it over here, yeah. You've seen these around your house again. Liquid propane, that one goes click, click. Uses propane and air. So using propane and air is not going to be as hot as using propane and oxygen. They also make little sets years ago, and I've seen a few of them since in later years, but they're expensive for the gas to where it really doesn't make sense. They make a little set that uses, it's generally the taller, slightly taller, but smaller around 16-ounce bottles. I think this is a 20, but they use a little 16-ounce bottle. They have one that's propane. They have one that's MAP. And MAP is a mixture gas. MAP is not a specific gas. It's a mix. And methane, propane, propylene, what all's in there? Anyway, it's a man-made mixture. And they try to say that it's the idea with the MAP gas is it's close to acetylene for the amount of heat or temperature, I forget. It's still not quite there, and you still can't weld with it well. And I think it's kind of out of place up here anyway because it's very expensive. It's supposed to be safer, but if you handle the stuff well, there's not a lot to be afraid of. And if you don't, of course, you put oxygen in your acetylene, you have boo-boos. And boo-boos are bad, and you will go away. But anyway, those mixed, the little bottles that they have, so you have two little bottles, so you can have a regular little oxygen acetylene, little kit that you can cut with and braze with. And last I looked at it, was like the oxygen's the one that's bad. The propane cylinder is just a regular propane. And they didn't make an acetylene, small acetylenes for them. But the oxygen was like $30 for the last time I saw one. And you're talking a bottle that does almost nothing. Now, here are these. These ones here, those are practical little bottles that you can actually use and do stuff with. Standard acetylene, standard small oxygen. I've used that set cutting 1-inch plate, and I don't remember whether I made it for a full hour or not, but I know I did over a half an hour of cutting. I mean, I was actually cutting some stuff. It was not, you had to be careful. You didn't want to use too big of a tip, but it actually lets you do quite a bit. They're pretty handy for field work. So, another one that we got here. If you want to know we're going to be running around. We're going to be jumping back and forth. We're going to be doing all kinds of stuff because it's as I remember it and as I look at something. This isn't really fully structured. It's just trying to be full. But instead, and this here, which this is an aluminum CO2 can, and this one here is a 50-pound. On CO2, again, since it's liquid, we don't go by cubic foot, we go by the pounds of the liquid on this one. They could also go by gallons. So in propane, it's normally sold by gallons, and they figure out the gallons usually by putting it on a scale for how many pounds you put in the bottle. And it's the same thing with acetylene. When you're filling a bottle, they put it on a scale, and they fill it up, and from the weight, they know how much went in there. They give it a given pressure, and it slowly absorbs into the acetone. They'll hook up a whole bunch of bottles all at once. Now, on the other part of that, with acetylene, which is important, and if we look here, you won't always see it on the smaller bottles, but on the big ones, you will. and it's actually a good thing to look for. Right over here, 368 on this bottle. And that is the last time they filled it, that's how many cubic foot they calculated from the weight of the acetylene that got dissolved. It was 368 cubic foot. And when they say cubic foot, when you're talking cubic foot of gas, since obviously if we compress it, it's less. Cubic foot, when you're speaking of bottled gases, is not what's in the bottle. Cubic foot is how many cubic foot it would be if it was at standard pressure and temperature, 68 degrees, 14.7 psi. Standard temperature, pressure, that's where that figure comes from. It's not from being stuffed in a bottle. So when it's stuffed in a bottle, it's obviously a lot more dense, but it is measured according to what it would be at full, at standard pressure. Another little thing here, back again with bottles. The bottles are not all the same for pressure. This is a higher pressure bottle than this one. This one here is also a higher pressure. This, I forget what, I think these are an S, and I think this is a T. I'm pretty sure that one's a T. This is a K. They use different letters on them because they come in different series. The other way, which is more common, this is 150 cubic foot. This is 300. This is 200. I normally don't do the 200s because, as you can see, this 200, it's not as much as the 300, but it's just so close to as much of a bother to carry and put in the, I'd rather get a big bottle or make it easy to carry. The 150s are easy to carry. So that's personally, but also this is expensive, and it was a bottle of helium that already had helium in it. When I bought the empty bottle, it came with free helium in it, so yeah. And that's something that you can do too with depends on your bottling company, but where I've been here, they've been really nice with me. They will give me the trade-in on this bottle, and then I give them another $100 or something and upgrade it to the bigger bottle, as opposed to having to go buy one of these at its full regular 500 and whatever they cost. So that's really nice of them to do stuff with like that. But I'm also a relatively good volume customer. So they probably won't do that for you the first time you walk into a gas store. Also, they test these. Now, there's two things when you're doing gas sets. Most of the places would prefer that you rent bottles from them. And so you rent the bottle, you take it home, you have a contract where you pay them so much every month for the bottle. And let's see, I recently got a bill for these. It was $77 per month for 2 of these. It was a mistake because I have owned bottles. I don't have a rental contract. But that mistake gives you some idea of what one of these costs every month to keep it without using it. Now, if you have a big project, you're normally a little shop, you have a big project coming up, rental bottles can be great. You don't have to invest $10,000 or $15,000 in buying a lot of bottles. You sign up for rental bottles, and if you've signed up for, say, 4 big rental bottles, the rental on that bottle, it gives you 4 bottles, but you can keep taking them back and get another one as quick as you want. So you've got 4 bottles that you can have new ones every morning. So you can do a lot of work, and the rental in that case doesn't cost you that much. Now, when you're done with that big job, whatever's left in that bottle, you got to turn it in or start paying every month for just keeping a little bit of gas in it. That's why I have gone with purchase bottles, because I don't do that often where I'm doing a really big job, but I have enough bottles I could because I collect things. But I will normally do medium job, and then we're done, and it's like we got 6 half-full bottles on sets, and you don't really want to give them up, and you don't want to pay $100 a month to keep them around either. So by owning them, I avoid that. When you go to look at the bottles, you want to look and see on the label here if it belongs to somebody. And it can be very, very confusing. You will see some around the ring here, they say U.S. Army, U.S. Navy, and you go, oh my Lord. The military has surplused them. Those are generally privately owned bottles. Now, secondarily, you got to look at that again. Sometimes those privately owned bottles were bought by a bottle company that wants to rent them. So they'll have stamped over here, property of. So you got to look at these really close with a very negative attitude towards them and figure once in a while you're going to bite it. Once in a while you're going to buy one that you think is private, but it isn't. Or you're going to go the other way and you're going to pass up a whole bunch of bottles that were good bottles. And I have erred on the side of buying bottles that I wasn't totally sure of. And I have had less than 5% that turned out to be wrong. But I still looked at them a little bit first. One of the other things you'll do is sometimes you'll get ones that have a company name, property of, but the company went bankrupt. So they sold the bottles, and they're actually private bottles now because that company that claimed them, they no longer exist. So there's a whole bunch of gray area in there. And then on the other part of that, even if you know and are convinced that it's a good private bottle, you got to get your bottler to be convinced of it. Now with private bottles, another thing you run into, and this again depends on where you're at, what your particular bottle company is like. Guys here in town are good. All of them are good, okay? That's one of the things, Fairbanks, we've been a welding town since they started the pipeline. Before that we weren't really, but they're all good this way, and that is when I do take them a bottle, it may have been not hydro-tested, inspected, anything for 20 years. They will take it in, they will do the inspection, they will give me another bottle, just like I'm exchanging a soda pop bottle. It's cool. There used to be a company in this town that didn't do that. They're broke now. They got bought out by one of the other companies and things have changed. But anyway, their procedure was if you had an owned bottle, they would send it away for you to their bottling plant, charge you an extra fee for the fact that they were transporting your bottle, charge you an extra fee for inspecting it every couple years, and it was really just, it was brutal. So, yeah, and at the time that I was first transitioning into doing this myself, that company, that was their rule for the bigger bottles. But on little bottles, they would exchange. So my first bottles were specifically this size here only because that company that was brutal would exchange these ones. And so would everybody else in town. It was only the big ones that they were going to charge you the extra on. There was something else I was thinking with the... Oh, because the other company in town, they told me if I opened up a charge account with them, as long as I did $1,000 a month, they would give me all the bottles I want rent-free. And that seemed really attractive when I was at a point that I knew for the next 6 months I'm going to spend $1,000 a month, or more. I spent, a couple thousand, $4,000 now and then on welding supplies. It didn't have to be on gases, just on welding supplies at their company. So that seemed pretty good, but then again, you think about it, at the end of the job, as you get to the end of it, and you got how many bottles that are full out here, they've been giving me free rent now. Do I pay rent or do I give up the gas that's in that bottle because I didn't want to pay rent? And I'd rather keep it for the next job. And what I have done is I have looked around many times, auctions, garage sales. There actually was a garage sale about 4 weeks ago that had a whole stack of these for $50 a piece that were obviously privately owned bottles. And I've told some other peoples about them. I have enough bottles at this point. I just really didn't feel like packing them. I mean, they're right there. I didn't feel like packing them to the truck. And it was down a hill. It was kind of a nasty place to get to. If they were right at the truck, I probably would have just loaded them up still, because that's That's kind of my, used to be I quit at $35 a bottle for surplus bottles, figuring it doesn't matter if it's $400 new, there's a gamble there, there might be something wrong I don't see. I mean, obviously, while I say they have the pop bottle exchange, if this comes in here with a saw cut through the side of it, they're not going to exchange you. There's a certain rationality to that. It's just like if you were turning in for your 10-cent deposit in Oregon back in 1975, they weren't going to give you a deposit if you brought them in the top of the bottle that said 5-cent or 10-cent deposit. You know, you have to bring in the whole bottle. The broken top of it wasn't going to cut it. So we have our gases in our bottles. Gases coming out of our bottles, we want to regulate them. This one here, as I say, is a fixed regulator.